I'm Lauren Whitaker, 30 years old, and ever since I can remember, I've been my dad's shadow. The day I showed up at my parents' house with plane tickets in hand, I thought we'd finally be starting the trip he'd always dreamed of. Instead, my mother opened the door, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You're not invited to your father's birthday." I stood there holding a folder full of confirmations and reservations like they meant something. Little did I know that single sentence would tear open the truth behind everything I thought I understood about my family. By the time I turned around and walked back to my car, the person I had been for 30 years was already gone. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever tried to give someone you love the perfect gift only to watch it fall apart in front of you. I grew up just outside of Denver in a split-level house where everything looked fine from the outside. My mom, Diane, always kept the place spotless. My older brother, Chase, was the golden boy, straight-A student quarterback, early admit to law school. And then there was me. Not a rebel, not a prodigy, just there. Dad, his name's Richard, was the only one who really saw me. He's the one who stayed up helping me build my 4th grade science project out of wire hangers and duct tape. The one who showed up to every softball game, even the ones where I struck out every time. And after I moved to Chicago for work, he still called me every Sunday without fail just to hear about my week. Mom was different. Not cruel exactly, just cold. I can't remember her ever hugging me unless someone was watching. But with Chase, it was a different story. She had this way of looking at him like he was the sun. Every award he brought home went up on the fridge. Every success of mine got a polite nod. "That's nice, honey," she'd say, always followed by something Chase had just accomplished. When I got my job as a financial consultant at Bancroft & Wells, she barely looked up from her phone. Meanwhile, when Chase made partner at his firm, she threw a garden party with catering and live jazz. I tried not to let it bother me. I had my own life, my own career, my own friends. But Dad always made me feel like I mattered. So when he had that small heart attack last spring, nothing major, just a scare, I dropped everything and flew home. Took a leave from work, cooked, cleaned, drove him to appointments. Mom didn't like it. Said I was disrupting the house routine. But Dad, he'd smile when I brought him soup or sat with him through physical therapy. That's when I knew I wanted to do something big for his 60th. He used to talk about Tuscany like it was a place from a dream. His grandfather was born in a little village there. Growing up, we'd flip through an old family album together, black and white photos of stone houses and olive groves. It was just stories then. But I wanted to make it real, so I started saving. I set aside every bonus, every tax refund, every dollar I could spare. Over 2 years, I saved $56,000. The plan was simple, a 10-day family trip to Italy. Flights, lodging, meals, everything covered. I found a villa near Montepulciano with room for all of us overlooking the vineyards. I even contacted the owners personally, a retired couple who promised a private wine tasting and a home-cooked welcome dinner. When I pitched the idea at a family dinner, Dad's face lit up like a kid's on Christmas morning. He kept repeating, "You'd do that for me?" Chase nodded. Even his wife Emily smiled and said something about wine tasting. Mom asked about dates and whether the villa had air conditioning. It felt like a yes. After that night, I threw myself into the details. Booked tours, found a pasta-making class in Siena, lined up a day trip to Florence. I even tracked down distant cousins still living in the area. They ran a small olive farm on land our family once owned. They sent photos of old property records and said they'd love to meet us. But little by little, things started to shift. Mom began forgetting when I was supposed to come by and discuss plans. Chase stopped returning texts. Emily's encouragement turned vague. Only Dad stayed engaged, practicing his Italian with a little phrase book I gave him. "Buongiorno, figlia," he'd say, over the phone, mangling the accent but always laughing. Still, I told myself it would come together, that it was just nerves, that once the tickets were booked, they'd have to go along. I never imagined that the door would open on a quiet Tuesday morning and that I'd be the one left standing outside. And I definitely didn't see what would come next, or just how far someone would go to make sure that trip never happened. I didn't turn around right away. I just stood on the porch for a while, keys in one hand, the envelope with the Italy plans in the other. The wind had picked up. I remember that. It rattled the little wind chime Mom had hanging by the front door. I could hear laughter from the living room window, people clinking glasses, someone shouting for more ice. I don't know how long I stood there listening. When I finally walked back to my car, I didn't look behind me. I drove straight home, didn't stop for gas, didn't stop for food. My apartment building was quiet when I got there, just the way I left it, everything in its place. The wine I'd been saving for the trip sat on the counter unopened. A bottle of Chianti I'd bought from a specialty shop downtown, meant to be uncorked on the balcony of the villa in Montepulciano. I opened it anyway. I didn't pour it into a nice glass, just grabbed the first one I could find from the dish rack. I sat out on the balcony, 12 stories up, with the city humming below and the skyline blinking against a cloudy sky. My phone stayed inside. I didn't want to see the messages, or worse, none at all. It was almost 10 when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw Jennifer, my best friend since college, holding a grocery bag with what looked like chocolate bars poking out the top. I brought reinforcements, she said as I opened the door. Wine, chocolate, ice cream, all three. She dropped the bag on the kitchen counter and turned to look at me. Your text sounded serious. I nodded and poured her a glass. Then I told her everything. We stood there in the kitchen for over 2 hours, going through the whole timeline from the first idea of the trip to that moment on my parents' doorstep. Jennifer didn't interrupt much. She listened, eyebrows raised, arms crossed. Her silence made it easier to keep going. When I was done, she reached for the wine and refilled both our glasses. "That's cold," she said. "Even for your mom." I didn't answer. There wasn't much to say. "She really told you not to come." "In front of half the family," I said. "Does your dad even know?" I shook my head. "That's the part that gets me. I don't think he has any idea. They've been making all these decisions, telling people who knows what. He thinks I just opted out." Jennifer frowned, staring at the kitchen floor. "You canceled everything." "Yeah. The villa gone. The flights, the tours, the whole thing, all of it." She didn't say anything for a minute, just walked over to the window, stared out at the night. Then softly, she said, "What if you still went?" I blinked. "What?" "Just hear me out," she said, turning to face me again. "What if you still went? Not for them. Not for your dad's birthday. Just for you." "I don't know," I said. "That feels what, selfish? A little." "Yeah." "Lauren, when was the last time you took a trip for yourself? Not a work thing, not a family thing, just you." I had to think. Maybe a girl's trip to Nashville. But even that had been rushed, cut short by a last-minute project. "You've already done the research," Jennifer said. "You've got time off work. The money's sitting there. Why not use it?" I didn't answer right away. The idea was so far outside of what I'd been planning, I couldn't even picture it. But then I started thinking about it, not the trip I'd planned with group dinners and family photos, but something else. Smaller, quieter, just me. I could skip the villa, I said after a while. Find someplace different. Maybe Florence or Umbria. Jennifer walked back over and opened my laptop. "Let's just look," she said. "Doesn't mean you have to book anything tonight. Just see what's out there." We sat side by side on the couch, scrolling through listings, stone cottages with ivy-covered walls, apartments with balconies overlooking vineyards. It started to feel less like a consolation prize and more like something new. Something mine. This one I said, pointing to a converted tower on a hilltop. 1 bedroom. Quiet. A view of the valley. Jennifer grinned. Book it. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the button. He'd want you to go, she said. Your dad. You know he would. I clicked. We stayed up another hour, booking a flight direct to Rome and mapping out a few ideas. Jennifer left around 1 after making me promise I'd text her every day from the road. That night I turned off all my notifications before going to bed. Just for one night, I didn't want to see what anyone had to say. The next morning I woke up to 37 text messages, 18 missed calls, 3 voicemails. Most of the texts were from family, cousins, aunts, even Emily. Some were long, others short, but I didn't read them. One voicemail stood out. Tyler, left at 3:17 a.m. I pressed play. Lauren, it's me. Listen, I need to talk to you. I really messed up. We all did. Mom's been lying to everyone, even Dad. He didn't know about the trip. She told him you didn't want to be part of the birthday plans at all. He's been sitting here thinking you just disappeared. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Call me back. I sat there still holding the phone. The apartment felt quiet in a different way now, like the silence before something breaks. I called him back. Tyler picked up on the first ring. I need you to explain, I said. Everything. And he did. Every detail. Mom had intercepted emails, deleted texts, told Dad I was too busy to come home, told the rest of the family that I was trying to make the whole trip about myself, said I didn't want anyone else involved. She said you were trying to exclude people, he told me. Said you only cared about showing off. I didn't say anything. She twisted everything. Tyler continued. To everyone, even me. I should have asked questions, but it was easier to just believe her. I asked him how Dad found out. Last night, he said. He found one of your brochures, tucked in a drawer in Mom's desk. Asked her about it. She panicked, couldn't keep the story straight. Then he called the bank, saw the big withdrawal. She couldn't explain that either. My chest felt tight. He left, Tyler said. Packed a bag. He's at Uncle Jim's cabin now. He's not doing great. I sat with that for a long moment. What do we do now? We need to meet, Tyler said. You, me, and Dad talk through it. And after that, we talk to her. Together. I agreed. But before we hung up, I said one more thing. This doesn't fix everything, Tyler. I know, he said. But maybe it's a start. I told him to set the time. I'd be there. And for the first time in days, I finally knew where I was going next. Tyler texted me the address a few hours later. Uncle Jim's place, the lake cabin about an hour outside the city. We used to go there in the summers when we were kids, fishing off the dock, playing cards inside when it rained. I hadn't been there in years. I packed a small bag more out of habit than need. Just a sweater, a notebook, a few things to keep my hands busy in case there were long silences. The drive was quiet traffic light. I left the radio off. The cabin sat just past a bend in the road tucked between tall trees and the water. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, Tyler's car was already there. I parked next to it and sat for a moment watching the ripples on the lake through the trees. Then I got out. Tyler met me at the front steps. He looked tired, eyes a little puffy like he hadn't slept much. He nodded once, didn't say anything, just opened the screen door and let me in. Dad was on the back deck, sitting on the old bench that faced the water. He didn't turn around when I stepped outside, but I knew he'd heard me. The boards creaked under my feet. Hey, I said. He stood slowly, turned toward me. His eyes were red but clear. He opened his arms and I walked into them. We stood there for a long time, neither of us speaking. The lake lapped quietly against the rocks below. A bird called somewhere across the water. I rested my head against his shoulder like I used to when I was little, when I'd fall asleep during movies, and he'd carry me to bed. Eventually, we sat side by side on the bench. He rubbed his hands together and looked out at the lake. "Tyler told me what you planned," he said, "about the trip, the village, the cousins." I nodded. "I wanted it to be something you'd remember." He swallowed. "You've been working on this for 2 years, since your heart scare. I thought it was time." He nodded slowly. "I didn't know any of it." "Your mother, she never mentioned a thing." "I thought you knew," I said. "I thought maybe you didn't want to go." His face tightened. "No, I wanted to go. I still do." "I just didn't understand why you'd gone so quiet, why you weren't coming to the party." It didn't make sense. I told him about the emails, the canceled conversations, the brochures that kept disappearing. He didn't interrupt, just listened like he always had. "I canceled everything last week," I said, "after what she said, after the party planning." He was quiet for a moment, then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. It was the pasta-making class brochure I'd printed months ago, the one I'd left on the table during dinner. "It fell out of one of her nightstand drawers," he said. "She tried to say you abandoned the idea. Then she changed it to you making plans without telling anyone. Then she said you were forcing people to pay their own way. None of that's true." "I know," he said. I knew it the moment she started dodging the questions. He rubbed a hand over his face. "She told me you refused to come to any birthday plans, that you were too busy." I didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. "I should have known," he said. "I should have asked you directly. I didn't want to believe she was lying, but..." Something felt off. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. "Why do you think she did it?" He sat back, staring at the water. "Your mother's always had a hard time with us. You and me. The way we understand each other. I think it made her feel like an outsider. That's not how it was meant to be." "I know," he said quietly. "But somewhere along the line it turned into resentment. She needed control, and this trip was something she couldn't be a part of in the way she wanted, so she tried to bury it." Tyler stepped out onto the deck and sat on the steps. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes on the dock. "We need to talk to her, all 3 of us, together. She can't twist it if we're all in the room." Dad nodded. "But first we decide what we want to happen. Do we want answers? Do we want to move forward? What's the goal?" I thought about it. "I want her to hear what she did. I want her to understand how deep it cut." Tyler rubbed his hands together. "And I want her to get help." This went too far. Dad was quiet for a long time. Then he stood. "All right," he said. "We talk to her tomorrow. No yelling, no blame, just truth." I stood too. "And the trip." He turned toward me. "Do you think we could still go, you and me? Just us. I'd have to rebook. It wouldn't be the same villa, but the village is still there." He smiled, small, tired, but real. "Let's make it happen." We walked back to the cabin together, the 3 of us. There was a stillness in the air that hadn't been there before. Not peace, not yet, but maybe something close. The next morning we'd face what came next. But for now we had time to sit, to plan, to remember what it meant to be a family that tried. We met at the house the next afternoon. Dad had called earlier that morning. His voice was steady, but I could tell he hadn't slept much. "She knows we're coming," he said. I told her we needed to talk, the 3 of us. I pulled into the driveway around 2. Tyler was already there, standing by his car, with his hands in his pockets. The house looked the same flower pots on the porch, same little flag hanging by the mailbox. But walking up the path, something felt different, like the air had changed. Dad opened the front door. He didn't say much, just stepped aside and let us in. Mom was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch like she was waiting for an appointment. She didn't stand. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I took the chair across from her. Tyler sat next to me. Dad remained by the window for a moment, then came to stand behind us, arms crossed. The room was quiet. "We're not here to argue," Dad said finally. "We're here to talk. We need to understand what happened." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked from me to Tyler, then back down to her hands. "I want to hear it from you," he continued. "Did you tell Lauren I wasn't up for a trip? Did you say she wasn't welcome at my birthday?" Mom's jaw tightened. "I said we should keep things simple." "That's not what I asked," he said gently. She looked up at me then, her expression unreadable. "You've always had this way of making everything about you," she said. Tyler shifted beside me. Dad didn't move. "You come in with these big plans," she went on. "Trip surprises, grand gestures. Like the rest of us don't matter. Like you're the only one who knows what your father wants." "No one said you couldn't be involved," I replied. "You didn't include anyone," she snapped. "You handed us a full itinerary like we were just along for the ride." "That's not true," Tyler said quietly. "She tried. You ignored her. You shut her out." Mom looked at him surprised. "You told me she didn't want any of us involved," he added, "that she was planning it all without us." She didn't respond, just looked away. "You told me Lauren wasn't coming to my birthday," Dad said. "You said she didn't care. I didn't say it like that." But that's what I believed. The silence that followed wasn't sharp. It was heavy, like everything unspoken had finally taken up space. "I found the brochure," he said. "I saw the withdrawals. I know what was going on. I know what she planned, what she gave up." Still no reply. Tyler leaned forward. "Mom, why lie to all of us?" Her hands tightened in her lap again. "Because I was tired of being on the outside," she said. "The two of you," she nodded toward Dad and me, "have always had this connection. You never needed me in the same way. You share everything." And when she started planning this trip, it felt like she was pulling him even further away. "No one was pulling anyone," I said. She didn't look at me. "I just wanted to be part of something again. Something that felt like mine." "So you decided to turn the family against each other?" Dad asked, not harsh, just direct. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said. "But it did." Tyler said, "You lied. You made people choose sides. You made Dad think his own daughter didn't care about his birthday." Her face twisted slightly like she wanted to argue, then it softened. "I was wrong," she said. "I handled it wrong. I didn't know how to fix it once it started." Dad sat down across from her. "You could have said something. We could have figured this out together." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't think you'd listen." Tyler sat back in his chair, arms folded. No one spoke for a while. Then Dad said, "You need help, Diane, not because you're a bad person, but because this can't happen again, to us, to anyone." She nodded slowly. "I'll go," she said, "to therapy, if that's what it takes." "It's a start," he replied. We didn't hug. No one cried. But something loosened in the room. Something uncoiled. Afterward, Dad walked us out. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway. He paused beside my car. "Still thinking about the trip?" he asked. "I started making calls this morning," I said. "We won't get the same villa." But I found a place nearby. Quiet. Beautiful views. His eyes lit up. "Just the two of us." "That's the plan." Tyler came up beside us. "You sure you don't want me tagging along?" he asked, half smiling. I looked at him. "You okay with not going?" He nodded. "This was always about you and Dad. I get that now." I nodded. "We'll bring back pictures. Bring back olive oil," he said. We laughed, all three of us. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, rebooking flights and sorting through small inns nestled in the hills of Tuscany. My fingers moved slower than before, but with more certainty. Each confirmation that came through felt like a step forward, not just for the trip, but for everything we were trying to rebuild. The next morning, I'd finalize the last of the details, and in just a few weeks, Dad and I would board a plane not just for Italy, but towards something we hadn't had in a long time: a clean beginning. It took about a week to put the new plan together, not because it was complicated, just smaller, easier in some ways, no head count to manage, no group logistics, just me and my dad, 2 tickets, 1 itinerary, and a list of places we'd both dreamed about for years. I found a place just outside of Montepulciano, not the villa I'd originally booked, but a quiet apartment on the top floor of a stone house with a small terrace overlooking the valley. The owner, a retired school teacher named Lucia, wrote back to confirm everything herself, said her grandfather remembered the Valsky family name from when he was young. That made Dad smile when I told him. Every few days, we'd sit together at the dining room table, Dad with a yellow notepad, me with my laptop mapping out our route. He practiced simple Italian phrases out loud while I double-checked train schedules. "How do you say, 'Where is the olive oil?'" he asked one night, pen in hand. I pulled up the translation, "Dove l'olio d'oliva." He repeated it slowly, breaking each syllable apart. "Dove e l'olio d'oliva." Then he grinned. "I'm going to forget that by breakfast." "You'll remember when it matters," I said. He nodded, then looked down at his list again. "Do you think they'll recognize the name, our name, I mean?" "Falsky." "Maybe," I said. Lucia seemed to. He sat quietly for a moment, tapping the pen against the table. Then he said, "You know, when I was a boy, your grandfather never talked much about Italy, just bits and pieces. A memory about the olive harvest or a cousin who could climb trees faster than anyone. It always felt like a story that wasn't finished." I closed the laptop. "We'll finish it." He didn't reply, but he nodded once the way he did when something mattered more than he wanted to admit. We left on a Tuesday. Flight out of O'Hare, direct to Rome. Neither of us slept much on the plane, but that didn't matter. The excitement kept us wide awake. Dad kept looking out the window like the landscape might suddenly turn into something familiar. When we landed, the sky was overcast, and the air smelled like dust and heat and something sweet underneath maybe jasmine. At the car rental counter, the clerk gave us a map and warned us that some of the back roads weren't always marked clearly. "That's all right," Dad said, tucking the map under his arm. "We're good at getting lost." The apartment was even better than I hoped. The stone walls stayed cool even in the afternoon sun. From the terrace, we could see rows of grapevines stretching out across the hills, the tops of old cypress trees poking up like dark green candles. Lucia greeted us at the door with a small basket of tomatoes and bread. She spoke slowly, careful with her words, and somehow Dad managed to get through an entire sentence without needing my help. "Grazie," he said, holding the basket. "Molto buono." That made her laugh. "Molto buono, sì." The next morning, we drove to Castellina, the village where Dad's grandfather had been born. It was smaller than I imagined. Narrow streets, shutters painted in faded blues and greens, laundry hanging on thin lines between buildings. We parked in the town square and followed the directions I'd printed from home up a cobbled street and past a bakery that smelled like fresh yeast and sugar. The municipal office was tucked inside an old stone building with ivy climbing up the side. A bell above the door jingled when we walked in. Inside, a woman in her 70s sat behind the desk sorting through papers. She looked up, and Dad stepped forward. "We're looking for..." "Family," he said, placing the old document on the counter. She adjusted her glasses and leaned in, scanning the paper. Then she smiled. "Falski," she said. "Ah, sì. Una famiglia antica. Vecchi vecchi." She picked up the phone and made a call, speaking in quick Italian. A few minutes later, she motioned for us to follow. Down a side street, around a corner, and through a gate into a courtyard filled with potted herbs and grapevines. A man in his 60s stood up from a wooden bench. He was tall, with a weathered face and eyes that looked exactly like Dad's. "Giovanni Recci," he said, shaking Dad's hand. "My grandmother was a Falski. Come, sit. Family eats together." That afternoon turned into evening. We sat under a vine-covered pergola with Giovanni and his wife and their adult children passing around plates of roast chicken bowls of olives, glasses of local wine. The language didn't matter as much as I thought it would. People pointed, laughed, mimed, smiled. Every time someone said Antonio, Dad's face lit up. Near the end of the meal, Giovanni's daughter Sofia brought out a box of documents. Old papers, photos, certificates. One of them showed Antonio Falski, age 16, leaving Italy in 1912. Dad stared at the photo for a long time. "That's him," he said. "That's my grandfather." Sofia nodded, then translated as Giovanni spoke. Antonio was called the Brave One. He left, but his brother Matteo stayed. Matteo is our great-grandfather. "So, you and us, same route." Dad cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said softly, "for this, for all of this." On the walk back to the apartment, the sky was dark, but the streets were quiet and warm. We didn't talk much, just walked. I glanced over once and saw him smiling to himself, hands in his pockets, looking up at the stars. That night back on the terrace, he turned to me. "This trip, it's more than I ever imagined." I nodded. "You made it happen," he said. We sat there for a while longer, watching the hills disappear into the dark. The sounds of the village quieted until all we could hear was the faint rustle of vines in the breeze. There were still places to go: Florence, Siena, the old olive grove. But that night felt like a chapter closing, a piece of history that had waited a long time to come home. The next morning we drove out to the edge of the valley. A long gravel road led through rows of olive trees, their silver-green leaves rustling in the breeze. The grove hadn't changed much, Giovanni said. The same family had worked it for generations, same soil, same tools in some cases. They called it La Terra dei Due Fratelli, the land of the two brothers. Dad parked the car under a patch of shade and stepped out slowly, looking around like he was trying to take in every detail at once. He walked ahead of me, hands in his pockets, moving between the trees like he was afraid to touch them. "They planted these?" he asked. Giovanni nodded. Matteo sighed yes. Some from Antonio's time, too, before he left. Many still produce. Dad reached up and touched one of the branches. He would have been just a boy. We followed Giovanni through the grove until it opened onto a small clearing. In the center was a low stone wall and a bench that looked like it had been carved out of an old trough. He motioned for us to sit. Then he pulled something from his bag, a tin of olive oil wrapped in a cloth and a small plate with slices of bread. He poured the oil carefully, then handed the plate to Dad. "This," Giovanni said, "is from the trees your family planted." Dad took a slice, dipped it, and brought it to his mouth. He didn't speak right away, just nodded slow and thoughtful. "Best I've ever had," he finally said. That afternoon we stayed longer than we meant to. Giovanni shared stories passed down through the family. Matteo's stubbornness, Antonio's quiet charm, how they'd written letters back and forth for nearly 30 years before the correspondence stopped. Dad asked if they had any of those letters. Giovanni shook his head. War lost many things, but the stories stayed. Before we left, he handed Dad a worn book wrapped in a string. Inside were names, handwritten records of births, marriages, family lines. It wasn't official, not by modern standards, but it was something. "This is for you," he said, "to carry home." We drove back through the countryside in the early evening. The light was soft, the fields golden. Neither of us talked much. There wasn't anything to say. Later that week, we took the train to Florence, walked through galleries Dad had only ever seen in books. He stood for a long time in front of a painting by Caravaggio, his arms crossed, his eyes tracing every brushstroke. Then we sat at a cafe and ordered pasta with red wine, just because we could. On our last night, we walked back to the tower apartment and stood out on the terrace. The hills below were dark now, the lights of distant farms flickering here and there. "You know, Dad said when I was younger, I used to think history was just something you read about. Names on a page, places you'd never visit." I leaned against the railing. "But seeing this, being here, it's different." He looked over at me. "Thank you." We didn't say much after that, just stood there watching the sky fade to deep blue. We flew home 2 days later. At the airport, Mom was waiting near the baggage claim. She stood a little apart from the others, arms folded, expression guarded. When she saw us, she gave a small wave, then walked toward us slowly. "Welcome back," she said, her voice even. "Thank you," Dad said. There was a pause. Then she turned to me. "I'd like to hear about it, if you're willing." I nodded. "We brought pictures." That evening we had dinner together at a small restaurant near the house. Just the 5 of us, me, Dad, Mom, Tyler, and Emily. No decorations, no speeches, just a meal. The conversation was quiet at first, but then Dad started telling a story about getting lost in a Tuscan roundabout, and the tension eased. At one point, Mom asked about the grove. "Did you find the trees?" she asked. "We did," I said. "They're still standing." She looked down at her napkin. "That's good." No one pushed the moment, but it felt like something small had opened. The weeks that followed were uneven. Some days felt normal, others didn't. But Dad and I kept in touch more often. Tyler and I started a Sunday brunch routine, and Mom began therapy twice a week. We didn't pretend everything was fine, but for the first time, we weren't pretending at all. And slowly, something started to change. The shift didn't happen overnight, but it started with a phone call. Mom rang one Saturday morning and asked if I had time for coffee, just the 2 of us. She suggested a small cafe on the edge of town, the one with the mismatched mugs and quiet music playing overhead. I got there early, chose a seat by the window. When she walked in, she looked a little unsure, like she was expecting me not to show. She sat down and took off her coat, smoothing it over the back of the chair. "Thanks for coming," she said. I nodded. "You doing all right?" She hesitated. "Better. Not perfect." We didn't dive into the past right away. We talked about the weather, how the tomatoes in her garden weren't doing so well, how Tyler's daughter had just started ballet lessons. It was small talk, but it felt careful, like setting the table before a hard meal. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook, spiral-bound with notes scribbled along the sides. She flipped it open, then looked at me. "I've been writing things down, things I didn't say before, things I didn't know how to say." She slid it across the table. "You don't have to read it now, or ever, but I needed to say them out loud to someone, even if it's just paper." I didn't touch it right away, just kept my hands around my mug. "I'm not asking for things to go back," she said. "I know what I did. I know how deep it went, but I want to be better, and I want you to know I'm trying." There was a pause. Then I said, "Trying matters." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since she sat down. Later that afternoon, I read the notebook. It wasn't dramatic, just simple reflections, notes about therapy, memories of our family that I'd forgotten or maybe never knew she'd noticed. Some of it hurt, but most of it felt honest. A few weeks after that, we all met at Dad's house for Sunday lunch. He grilled out on the back deck while Emily brought a bowl of fruit salad that her kids had helped assemble. Mom brought a lemon tart, not store-bought. She made it herself. The table was set outside, paper plates, iced tea sweating through the cups, laughter. Not forced, but tentative, like a song we hadn't played in a while. Tyler clinked his glass with a fork halfway through the meal. "I've got news," he said. "Emily and I are moving." Everyone paused. "Not far," he added. "Just into the city. Better school, shorter commute." "But, yeah, it's time." Dad raised his glass. "To change." "To change," we echoed. Later that evening, I stayed behind to help clean up. Mom was in the kitchen rinsing out bowls. "Remember when we used to do this after Thanksgiving?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me a damp dish towel. "I never said it back then, but I always appreciated how you stayed behind. Everyone else would go watch football. You always stayed." I dried the bowl, placed it in the rack. "It felt like the right thing to do." She smiled a little sad. "You've always known what's right." We didn't say much more after that, but it felt like something old had been cleared away. A few nights later, Dad called. "I want to do something," he said, "for the family." I waited. "I want to throw a dinner, not a holiday, just something to mark this new chapter. Nothing fancy, just us. And I want you to help me plan it." I said yes without hesitation. The next week we sent out simple invitations. No fancy graphics, no RSVP cards, just a group message and a printed note delivered by hand. We held it in Dad's backyard under string lights hung from tree to tree. Folding tables, mismatched chairs, cloth napkins that Mom ironed herself. Everyone brought something. Tyler grilled again. Emily made her famous potato salad. I handled the decorations, simple centerpieces of herbs and candles. Near the end of the evening, Dad stood up and tapped his glass. "I know this isn't a big event," he said. "No anniversaries, no birthdays, but I wanted to say something." Everyone turned toward him. "I've learned something in the last few months," he continued. "Sometimes family isn't about how long we've known each other, or how much we agree. It's about showing up, owning what we've done, and deciding to keep going." He looked around the table. "I see that in every one of you." The table was quiet, but not tense, just still. He sat back down. "That's all." Someone passed around more dessert. A breeze rustled the trees. Fireflies blinked in the grass nearby. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real, and sometimes that's what matters most. As the evening drew to a close and the last flickers of candlelight swayed in the breeze, I sat beside Dad on the porch steps while the others lingered at the table behind us. Tyler was laughing with Emily over something one of the kids had said, and Mom was inside gathering leftovers into containers with quiet care. Dad stretched his legs out in front of him and let out a soft sigh. "It's strange," he said, "how much can change without you even noticing it's happening. Then one day you look around and it's all different, but somehow better." I nodded, watching the shadows play along the grass. "I didn't think we'd get here," he added. "Me neither," I said truthfully. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Mom stepped out with a plate of cookies in her hands, offering it to us without a word. Dad took one, then handed me another, and she went back inside. It was a small gesture, but it felt like peace. That night when I got home, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the little notebook Mom had given me weeks before. I opened to a random page. In her handwriting, slightly slanted and uneven in places, she had written, "There are things I didn't understand until it was too late. But I'm learning now, and I hope that counts for something." I closed the notebook gently. It did count. Not because everything had been fixed, but because she had chosen to begin again even when it would have been easier to stay the same. Over the months that followed, we all kept choosing. Choosing to show up, choosing to listen, choosing to forgive, not because forgetting was easy, but because holding on had only weighed us down. Dad and I still talked about Italy often. We printed one of the photos from the grove, the one with the sun just barely touching the tops of the olive trees, and framed it for his study. It sat on the desk next to the family ledger Giovanni had given us, its pages now carefully preserved in clear plastic sleeves. And one day, Mom surprised me by asking if I'd teach her how to use the travel app I'd used for our trip. No plans, she said. I just want to see what's out there. We didn't plan another big reunion. No sweeping speeches or dramatic makeups, just dinners, conversations. Slowly rebuilding the kind of trust that had once been easy, but now meant even more because of what it had survived. Sometimes, life doesn't give us justice in one sweeping moment. Sometimes it's handed to us in quiet offerings, a shared story, a hard truth, finally spoken, a seat left open at the table. And when we accept it, when we choose to heal instead of hurt back, that's when something real begins. If you've ever had to rebuild something that was broken, if you've ever found peace in the most unexpected place, then I hope this story stayed with you. And if it did, I'd be honored if you shared it or joined me again sometime. There are always more stories to tell, and sometimes the most powerful ones are the quietest. Take care.